Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you for attending tonight. My name is Dr. Warren Doctor, or Doctor, and it's a pleasure that everyone is here this evening. Thank you for giving us your Friday night and coming out and listening and coming to the East Tennessee Historical Society. I don't know who all here is a member, but I would like to encourage everybody to join. If you're not a member, at least to join up on our mailing list. For those of you that are home, thank you for joining on Zoom. We'll be monitoring you for any questions that you might have coming up. Now, one of the things I always do when I start these talks is to tell you about some of our up-and-coming programs. We have a really exciting one. Who here is a fan of quilts? We're having a quilt turning, let me just check the time here, at 6 o'clock on October 18th. We're very excited about that. Mary Kay Vodvocal will be coming and sort of talking about all of our quilts. We have an enormous quilt collection, so we're really excited about that. So we'll be having that. And in addition to that, we have a lot of stuff on this month. We're going to have Andy Peck talking about a sort of collection of personal letters, Ada's journal, Emma's letters, and Charlie's novel from the 1800s of East Tennessee, sort of bringing that to life. That will be actually at noon, and that will be on October 20th. So that will be an actual brown bag lecture. And then we also have on October 27th, the history of East Tennessee. Bob Hutton will be coming to speak about the history of East Tennessee, and that'll start at 6 o'clock in the evening. So we have a lot of evening stuff going on. Usually we do these at noon, but we've had such eminent speakers, we prefer to do those in the evening, such as today's speaker, and I'll immediately start talking about that. I had the pleasure of meeting today's speaker recently at a conference, I think in Chattanooga, wasn't it? And we got on famously, and I'm really, really honored and happy he's here. So our speaker tonight is Scott Williams, and Scott is the CEO of Discovery Park out in West Tennessee. It is an enormous and amazing museum, and if you should ever find yourself in West Tennessee, I would really like to encourage everyone to go because it is incredible. And so it's they're currently based in Union City. Union City is where the museum is. But he's had an incredible career. He also worked in Washington, D.C., at Newseum in Washington, D.C., and was the president at Neverland. No, is that right?
It's close. Graceland.
Graceland. My mistake. Wrong celebrity. I apologize. I got that one wrong. I'm just warming up the crowd. Thank you for correcting me. That's my mistake. He also sits on several boards, including UT Martin, and he also sits for the state of Tennessee on the tourism board. I'm not calling that right. And he has authored several books, including a book on the sort of modern pop culture reporter who conquered New York. And he also has written one on the forgotten adventures of Richard Halliburton. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Scott. I'm also going to hand him my microphone so our people at home can listen. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Yeah, I got to have the box, too.
There we go.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, so let's start off. How many of you have heard of David Crockett? Let's see. Okay, that's good. So this is going to be a very easy crowd, I can see. Unfortunately, we're not starting off tonight with David Crockett. How many of you have heard of Bart Simpson? Let's see. Okay, good. So this is going to be a good crowd. So we're going to start off with season 20, episode 5, when Bart and his family pull up to the cozy cabins. And Homer says, "Here we are." And Bart says, "A log cabin? What am I, Davy Crockett?" And then he skips a beat and he says, "Also, who's Davy Crockett?" So I think that's the way a lot of people are. They know of Davy Crockett and they see a cabin or they see something that makes them think about Davy Crockett, but they don't really know who that is. That's a little bit the way I was when I showed up at Discovery Park of America, having worked at Graceland. It might be interesting to work at Neverland, but as a follow-up to Graceland, it would be especially interesting. So at Graceland and at the Newseum in Washington, D.C., I'd been around politics, I'd been around entertainment, and so it was really interesting when I saw the statue of David Crockett and some of the exhibits. I thought, I wonder why. What did he do that made him someone that is still remembered today? So I started doing a little research just for fun with no intention of doing a book. But what I noticed was there was a lot about West Tennessee that wasn't really making it in any books. The Texans certainly were all over. There's about 500 Davy Crockett high schools in Texas, and the folks here in East Tennessee, have parks and talk a lot. But I really wanted to explore more about what did the adult David Crockett do that ended up making him so famous, and it ultimately ended up being a book. So it took a couple of years. I was writing this during the pandemic, so it was kind of something to keep my mind off of all the horrible things going on in the world. But I really wanted to explore, why is Davy Crockett famous? And two quotes ended up at the front of the book that I think really sums up sort of Davy Crockett and his relationship with journalists. He said, "I stood no chance to become great in any other way than by accident." So he, in all humility, he just claimed it was by accident. But a reporter, George Pope Morris, in the New York Mirror in 1834 wrote, "We know not how many ages the fame of this gentleman will last, but he certainly makes a pretty considerable noise in his own time." So, David Crockett, it was really not by accident. I was fascinated, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. But I don't like to just talk. I like this to be an interactive experience. So you guys are going to participate with me tonight. We're going to do a David Crockett pop quiz. Since you all raised your hands, so you all are going to know this. And I really am going to need a lot of crowd participation. So we're going to practice. We're going to warm you guys up a little bit. So I'm going to get you all to read this out loud along with me. We're going to see if you know the blanks. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, greenest state in the land of the free. Raised in the woods so he knew every tree. Killed him up when he was only 3. Davy Crockett. Oh my goodness. I don't even need to do this tonight. You guys are all over this. You know all this stuff already. Is everybody at Zoom cool? Everything good with Zoom? Hello, Zoom folks. We're sorry you're not here. There's lots of free food and an open bar in the back, but right? We're having a great time. So Crockett wore a... Absolutely, everybody knows that, right? This is what David Crockett looked like, correct? Yes, no, that's right. Yeah, this is Fess Parker. So David Crockett really didn't wear a coonskin cap more than anybody else did when they were hunting in Tennessee. And I'll share a little bit about how this became part of the brand. But this is what David Crockett actually really looked like. And I was really... Because the David Crockett brand loomed so large in our minds, I really wanted to find out what was he really like. Let's see if I can find this in the book. I was really interested in what he really looked like. After an appearance in Boston, a reporter for the Boston Tribune described Crockett as an uncommonly fine-looking man, he wrote. His face has an exceedingly amiable expression, and his features are prominent and striking. He wears his hair, which is black, parted down the center of his forehead, combed back from his temples and ending in a slight curl at his neck. So this reporter was clearly into David Crockett. So somebody else wrote, another reporter in Pennsylvania wrote, in person he is rather above the medium height, about 50 years of age. His features are expressive, and we may even say handsome, particularly when he smiles. He is muscular and wears all the indications of excellent health, a bright and laughing eye, a ruddy cheek, and a row of teeth that would shame the whiteness of ivory. He says he can outgrin a panther, but he never grinned the bark off a tree. He is not witty, yet there is a dryness in his anecdotes and a kind of blunt good humor which makes them amusing and even instructive. So I thought it was really interesting to think about David Crockett being actually, a human being and a man instead of just being Fess Parker and being a fable. What did most people call him? So you obviously have heard me saying David Crockett, which is very difficult when everybody else in the universe calls him Davy Crockett. But in fact, people called him Colonel David Crockett. I saw that a lot. I saw Congressman David Crockett, in a lot of the writings. I tried to read every single thing I could get my hands on from back in the day to try to really get an understanding of what he was called. And of course, a lot of David Crockett. He was not called Davy Crockett in his lifetime except for as an insult. It was a pejorative. It was to put him in his place. It would be like patting him on his head and calling him Little Davy. And in a lot of the political writings that I read from back then, that is how they would insult each other. So in some of his writings, he called Martin Van Buren Little Van. And I'll share a little bit more about some of the things that he wrote about Martin Van Buren in a little bit. So where was David Crockett's home? Okay, so this one got me in trouble. Okay, so I clearly was trying to be provocative by saying West Tennessee's David Crockett, but I'm writing about David Crockett. I start off when he arrives in West Tennessee, but I've gotten probably 50 emails from people and posts that say this guy talking about me is an idiot. David Crockett is from East Tennessee. So you are right. David Crockett is from East Tennessee. I've actually been I went on a little road trip. Actually, I found him in Limestone. That's actually David Crockett at the Birthplace State Park. But I was writing mostly about West Tennessee because I felt like there wasn't a lot about him. And I am, I am right there. Discovery Park is there. His home is down here. He had a lot of different cabins. When you start really researching David Crockett, you find that there are people that came before us that are now long gone that left their research in the libraries all over West Tennessee, and they left the places where he had cabins, where he owned land. But David Crockett, the more you research, the more you discover that he was always trying to rob Peter to pay Paul. He was trying to trade this piece of land for this cabin. Fortunately, his second wife was a lot better with money and with land than he was. So that is why he even was able to do what he was able to do. But David Crockett spent a lot of time in West Tennessee. I'm going to go back and show you. He represented this area. And so this is where my wife, Michelle, who's back there in the back, say hi, Michelle. So Michelle and I live up here around Discovery Park. But my family in the early 1830s settled outside of Jackson in Haywood County, Tennessee. And so David Crockett was their representative. So this is the area that he represented when he was in Washington. So I love this story of this banker that was in Rutherford, Tennessee, that a farmer came in and said, I've got David Crockett's last cabin on my land, and I am going to plow it under because I'm tired of plowing around it. So the banker bought it. They stored the logs and intending to build a cabin, but they never were able to get the funds to do it until the 50s when, of course, David Crockett became a pop culture icon. And so they got together, they built this fully intending for it to be a tourist attraction. And it did become a tourist attraction and still is. And the folks in Rutherford, Tennessee, they have had David Crockett Days since the very beginning when they opened, and they celebrate David Crockett. We also, up in that area, we have, this is Discovery Park of America, where I come from. We have a lot of things. If you're interested in that era and you're interested in David Crockett, you'll want to come by and check us out. We're a 100,000 square foot museum sitting on a 50-acre heritage park. We were built 10 years ago, next year is the 10th birthday. We were built for $100 million by a philanthropist who had started Kirkland Stores. And we have a village of 13 cabins. We have gristmill. We have a forge. We have 2 lakes connected by a man-made river. We have 3 brand new hotels right next door. We have an aquarium. So anyway, if you're looking for some place for a little road trip, Michelle and I made our journey here we left this morning. And so, it's a great long weekend trip. We celebrate David Crockett's birthday. This is a young man that came. We had about 10 young people were dressed up as David Crockett for our celebration. We opened up a brand new forge on David Crockett's birthday, which was a lot of fun. And these are just some of the activities that take place during the day. I've got some brochures back there about the next David Crockett birthday, so you can grab one so you can add it to your calendar. Make sure you come and visit us. So these are the actual counties that David Crockett represented and when he represented them. Obion is where I live now, and Haywood is where my ancestors are from. So was David Crockett famous in his lifetime? Anybody? Yes, no? Yes. So the answer is yes. This is so David Crockett wrote this book, written by himself. But the thing about this that I thought was really interesting is David Crockett had a tagline that he would sign posters with, that he would write whenever somebody wanted him to sign something, he would add that notation to it. And I put it in the book, actually, in his handwriting. I leave this rule for others: when I am dead, be always sure you are right, then go ahead. And so a lot of people used that tagline, go ahead, and he's the one who started that. As far as I could tell, he's the very first famous person to have posters printed that were autographed and that he sold to try to make money. He was always trying to make money, and then he always spent more money than he made. So this was another case of not ever really being able to make as much money as he needed. Another aspect of his fame, this is Tom Thumb, who was a David Crockett fan and had "Go Ahead" written on the side of his carriage. This was a little bit more about that. I thought that was really interesting. Another really interesting aspect of David Crockett is how he managed his own fame. So fortunately, John Gatsby Chapman, who was a painter, who lived long enough to be able to years later write what he remembered about his experience working with David Crockett. And so I'll read to you just a little bit. Crockett complained to Chapman that all the previous painters had made him look sort of like a cross between a clean-shirted member of Congress and a Methodist preacher. So John Gatsby Chapman took a stab and painted this for David Crockett. And after a quick glance at the first painting of Crockett's head and shoulders, he was only slightly impressed with what he saw. Perhaps he was just thinking out loud or mumbling to himself, but his observation came out almost as a challenge. Many years later, Chapman wrote his memory of that moment when the idea for the final painting of Crockett was born. Crockett had mused, "If you could catch me on a bear hunt in a hurricane with hunting tools and gear and a team of dogs, you might make a better picture worth looking at." So Chapman responded he would certainly be happy to try, but it would have to be painted on a large canvas, and as he had never seen a bear hunt or a hurricane, Crockett would have to show him what those things looked like. And so together, they took off on this odyssey to create a painting, and David Crockett was always, from what I could read and from observations of others, much more enthusiastic about challenges like this than the job he was supposed to be doing in Congress. So while he was supposed to be, doing the work of the good people of West Tennessee, he was out looking for the gun he was going to carry in the painting, the clothes that he was going to wear. John Chapman had dogs already, and so he said, "I got the dogs, don't worry." And then Chapman writes that when Crockett came in, he said, "Oh, no, those are too fancy." So they went out into the streets of D.C. and found some dogs and brought those back. And they worked on it, they did sketches, and they still couldn't get it right. And finally, Chapman writes that one day David Crockett came in and said, I got it, I got it. He said he was more excited than he had ever seen him. He said, what I want you to paint me holding my hat up like I'm waving to my neighbor. Make me look like I'm a friendly, happy guy. And so this is the painting that they ended up with. You all have probably seen it, many times. The actual painting itself burned up in Austin in a fire. So this is a copy of the photo, so at least we know what it looked like. The other thing about David Crockett, and this is where the coonskin cap comes from. This was a play that toured all around. James Hackett was the actor in this one. He played Nimrod Wildfire in The Lion of the West. This play toured all over the country. It toured all over Europe. And what reporters would do back then is they would go to a play and they would write the words from the play in the words and act like it was David Crockett. So they pretended like it was David Crockett saying these things. All of these, very earthy, earthquake, and I can outrun, all this braggadocious stuff, became associated with David Crockett. So that continued long after his death and before Disney dug David Crockett up. These are all silent film actors or theater performers. The guy on the far right there named Jim Jeffries, he would do a David Crockett show and then a wrestling and boxing demonstration afterwards. So you got a 2-for-1 when you went to Jim Jeffries shows. So every hero has to have an enemy. So do you guys know who was David Crockett's bad guy? That's right. It was Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson and David Crockett were not friends, even though they were both from Tennessee. David Crockett, the question is, was David Crockett just being contrarian because Andrew Jackson would tell him what he wanted him, how he wanted him to vote? We'll never really know, and you can't really tell, but I know that they were big enemies, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Speaking of enemies, do you think that David Crockett and the Native Americans were enemies? Was he the Indian fighter as he was branded to be? No. He was not, correct. And it's really sad because that really was, thanks to Disney, a big part of the brand that came up later. So David Crockett did not consider Native Americans his enemies. Andrew Jackson in his Indian removal bill, many of you, because you're into history, have read it, I'm sure, and you know that Andrew Jackson ultimately was just trying to get the Native Americans off of the land so that it could be farmed. Well, David Crockett said, several of my colleagues got around me and told me how well they loved me and that I was ruining myself. They said this was a favorite measure of the president and I ought to go for it. I told them I believed this was a wicked, unjust measure and that I should go against it, let the cost to myself be what it might. And so David Crockett did vote against it. He was the only person from Tennessee to vote against it, and it did. It was the final nail in the coffin. The Nashville folks really went after him. James K. Polk and all of Andrew Jackson's cabal went after Davy Crockett with all that they could. Of course, it ended up, Trail of Tears ultimately resulted from that. This is the exhibit on the Trail of Tears at Discovery Park of America. We have a very large Native American gallery, and we are actually preparing next year to do our very first powwow. So that should be a really interesting experience for us to have. It's the first time anybody in our area has actually had a real powwow. Did David Crockett run for president? Only in his imagination. This is what David Crockett defeats Little Van. This is what he was planning on doing. I love reading the parts in all of the during all the research. I love the part about the wigs and how the Whigs, were these fancy Eastern folks who just could not figure this David Crockett thing out and could not figure out how Andrew Jackson was winning. And so they said, let's test and see how David Crockett works with people in the East. So his book came out, and they put him on a book tour. And so he traveled, all over Philadelphia, Boston. It was fascinating to read about that. It honestly could be somebody today going on a tour. Unfortunately, this is another example of David Crockett not being where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be in Congress. There were a lot of bills that came out. He was supposed to be voting. He was supposed to be, but he wasn't. He was out, publicly on a book tour. He would write articles. And it was really interesting to hear the response. It was interesting to read reporters writing about the response to David Crockett by the public. People would go wild. They had never seen anything quite like the response. And so you read some of the letters that went back and forth between some of the Whigs and the Whigs were not big David Crockett fans. They just wanted to win. So they said, let's see how he does in his re-election campaign, and if he is re-elected, let's seriously consider running him for president. So theoretically, there could have been a President Crockett, which would have been interesting. So Adam Huntsman, who is from Jackson, Tennessee, was running against David Crockett. Now, Adam Huntsman was actually somebody who was more concerned about the people of West Tennessee. He had spent more time just working with the people, trying to get, he was a businessman. He was trying to get rivers cleared, and he was really working hard. This was the first guy who had run against David Crockett that was similar in that he was from there. He knew the people. He spoke the way they did. He had their same passions, and so he thought he had a good chance to win. He wrote to Polk, Crockett is eternally sending anti-Jackson documents here, and it has had its effect. If he carried his land bill, I will give him strength. Otherwise, the conflict will not be a difficult one. Well, it was more difficult than Adam Huntsman did think, but he did win. So Adam Huntsman won 4-6-5-2 to 4-4-0-0. So Crockett lost. And he did not expect to lose. He thought he was going to win, and he had to put up with a lot of insults, a lot of hate. And so this is the kind of things that were in the newspaper. Crockett will find the business of coon hunting, which he will now resume, much better suited to his genius than legislation. The Whigs have used him until he is used up. So it was a lot of this kind of stuff that generated his frustration and his anger, and that made him want to leave and start over. So leaving and starting over. Why did David Crockett really go to Texas? Anybody know?
Just to move. He has to always moving westward.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So I'm going to tell you in a second why he really did. So I told the people of my district that I would serve them faithfully as I had done, but if not, they might go to H-E double toothpicks, and I will go to Texas. And so now what's interesting is there are several places where they say he said that for the first time, but I've never really been able to find any proof of where he said it for the first time. So I think he got a great response out of this talking point, and so he just used it over and over and over again. Any place where there was a stump or a bar, he would stand up and say this line, and he would get a rousing applause. And so this just became a line that, of course, is now a well-known part of history. Back in the 1950s, one of his descendants, I think it's great-great-great-granddaughter, found a letter that had been written. It was a letter that had been copied. So David Crockett wrote the letter to his daughter, and the family would copy it off and send it to the other family members. So this was a version of that. But in the letter, He says, I do believe it is a fortune to any man to come here. I have enrolled as a volunteer. All volunteers is entitled to vote for a member to form a constitution for this province. So he was planning on doing the exact same thing that he had done in West Tennessee. He was great friends with Sam Houston, and he and Sam Houston would hang out in Memphis. They would hang out in D.C. There's some really interesting stories about some of the trouble they got into, but they were big buddies. And Sam Houston was talking about Texas and going up there. So anyway, he had an idea that he was going to go and do the same thing he had done during the Creek War. And any time he never really had to fight. He would hunt. He would get food for the army. So he really was not intending to storm into the Alamo and be the hero. Another person who wrote about David Crockett, this was the other thing. I am in hopes of making a fortune yet for myself and family, bad as my prospects has been. So he really wanted to make a fortune for his family. He was hoping this would finally be the thing that was going to make it all turn out okay. I think this is really interesting from Forget the Alamo book. Crockett's arrival at the Alamo was one of history's great juxtapositional flukes, as if Teddy Roosevelt or Mark Twain had darted onto the Titanic at the last minute. So we're so used to thinking about David Crockett being part of the Alamo that we forget that for a lot of people, when they read that David Crockett was at the Alamo, they were like, what was David Crockett doing at the Alamo? It didn't make any sense at all for most people. But by that time, of course, he was already dead. So was he a hero? Was David Crockett a hero at the Alamo? If you believe the lunchboxes, he definitely was. So it is funny to think about the fact that kids used to take lunchboxes to school with people killing each other on them, and guns and swords. And anyway, so sort of the narrative about David Crockett at the Alamo was that he used up all of his bullets killing Mexican soldiers, and then he used his gun for the weapon until he killed even more. This is Dawn at the Alamo that's hanging in the courthouse there. That's the David Crockett, their version of him. There's all kinds of stories about whether or not, how much did he fight. There are soldiers that, there are people that were captured that were not killed until afterwards. Some have said David Crockett was amongst that group of people that said, wait, we're famous, don't kill us, and they killed them anyway. So, nobody will ever know, but it's fascinating to me that all these years later, there's still all this controversy and people talking about it, and there's a lot about that if you're interested in that. And I also think it's interesting that, the Alamo folks, they love them some David Crockett. And so, we've been working with them a little bit, and I'm a member of the Alamo Society, and they write a lot about David Crockett. And so really he was only in Texas for a few months. And so it's interesting how much he has resonated with the people there. So I don't know whether he was a hero or not, but I do know that his death sort of put him in the first line of a lot of other celebrities who their death and the way they died and how they died contributed to their fame. People continued to talk about David Crockett for decades after that. Did he really die? A lot of people said maybe he didn't really die. There were Crockett sightings for years and years and years. You can read in the newspaper articles, David Crockett has legitimately been seen this time, and he is in Texas, and here's what he's doing. To the point, David Crockett's son, John Wesley Crockett, actually put together a group of people that went down to Mexico to visit with a prisoner that everyone was absolutely positive was David Crockett, and it was not. So, is Elvis dead? Yes. Did David Crockett die at the Alamo? Probably. Anyway, so it did contribute to his fame. Did Walt Disney kill David Crockett? I'm going to say yes. So David Crockett, Indian Fighter, premiered on December 15th, 1954. Walt Disney was not particularly all that hopeful for it. He didn't know whether it was going to be a success or not. They were looking for shows to put on that would promote his theme park that he was building. So this was going to maybe promote Frontier World, Frontierland, but it was a huge success. 70% of households with TVs were watching. I just would love to know, I wish that somehow David Crockett could have known and could have seen what was going on that night when 70% of American households were watching Davy Crockett, Indian Fighter. Of course, Walt Disney was smart. He knew what he was doing, and so he seized upon that, and he made Davy Crockett a big part of his promotion and his campaign. Of course, this is another thing that kids did back then they wouldn't do anymore, pointing guns at each other. There were so many raccoon skin hats that were sold that there was a worry that raccoons were going to become endangered. They actually killed most of the raccoons in the United States, and then they started killing squirrels and skunks and everything just to even, it went from, I can't remember, it's in the book, but they went from 3 cents a piece to 60 cents a piece, the tail part. So anyway, so it was really a phenomenon unlike anybody had ever seen. So I worked for Elvis Presley Enterprises for 12 years, and part of my job I worked with the licensing and promotional people. So I know a little bit about licensing and promotion, and this was bigger even than Elvis at the time. These are just a few of the licensed products that came out. I've been trying to find a few of these. I collect, I don't want to go insane. My wife won't let me go insane buying too much, but it is fun to collect some of these things. You could have Davy Crockett braces. I like the way they think that we in the South say guitar. They even spelled it that way. Look at that little car seat. I didn't even know they had car seats in the 50s, but there's a Davy Crockett car seat. And now I've seen, with this work I've been doing and with David Crockett, I've probably seen more licensed products than anybody in the world. But this is my favorite licensed product that I'm about to show you. I'm going to get back so you can really get a good look at it. So this is Davy Crockett parakeets. Guaranteed to say Davy Crockett or exchange free. Somebody was brilliant. You've got to hand it to the people that owned that store. It was only $1.79. So the song also was a huge success. Bill Hayes released the original version on March 26th, and it was the #1 song on the Billboard chart for 4 weeks. All the versions sold 18 million records in 6 months, and that is an unbelievable phenomenon. And that is why all these years later, you guys still in this room could know that song. And somehow, even little kids, I do this a version of this with school groups, and it's insane how many little kids know the song. Somehow it resonates still with us and our culture. So, lest you think it's just all in the past, if you go to Disney Paris, you can stay at Disney's Davy Crockett Ranch still today. So it's a lot of carved animals and what people in Europe think we in Tennessee live like. They have salad bars on wagon wheels and lots of things like that. So Davy Crockett is still alive and well. I have friends who were just at Disneyland, and they said, we thought about you because we heard the Davy Crockett song about 100 times. So, he's still alive and well here in America. So what do you guys think David Crockett would think about the fame that... What do you think David Crockett would think about the Davy Crockett fame? Yeah, I thought about it, and I think he would like it, but I think he would be trying to make money off of it. He would have his own toy line. I think he would be autographing stuff at Toy Fair. I think he would have a YouTube channel and a TikTok, and but he would probably still be spending more than what he made. I will say that long after his death, the new state of Texas gave his wife a huge amount of land, and so she and some of her children took off. She sold enough of the land to be able to live quite comfortably until her death. And so ultimately, he did provide a fortune for his family, which I think he would be happy about. But when thinking about his fame, who had ever heard of Adam Huntsman before today. A few of you maybe have. Oh, sorry, Adam. So to compare David Crockett to Adam Huntsman, if you go to the right across from the waste plant in Jackson, Tennessee, there's a historic marker for Adam Huntsman. So compared to Adam Huntsman, I think David Crockett would be like, he would be very happy. So you can, I've got a Facebook page where I talk a lot about David Crockett still, and I post a lot of articles and videos and things I find. You can follow it there. I hope that you all come and see me. Email me at swilliams@discoveryparkofamerica.com. If you're going to come, I'd love to say hi to you and show you around in person. So shoot me an email. Do you guys want us to take questions? Yes, sir.
What was David Crockett's role in the Creek War?
You know what? What his role is to ride around the edges and hunt and bring food back in. He was based. The thing about researching David Crockett, and again, I'm not an academic. I want to make that perfectly clear. I have a journalism degree, and so I'm more approached it as a researcher. I have nothing but respect for historians, but that's not really me. And so, but I read a lot of what David Crockett wrote, but he was writing it with an ulterior motive at the time he wrote it. So it's hard to know how he really felt, 20 years earlier at the time. But he was really devastated by a lot of what he saw and what he experienced and the death. So he didn't really enjoy that, but he enjoyed hunting. And so he always was on the periphery hunting. Any other questions? Yes?
He was reporting to Jackson, wasn't he? And tried to...
Ultimately, there's a story about that where Andrew Jackson, David Crockett, I'm trying to remember it. David Crockett and a bunch of other people were like, we're out of here. And Andrew Jackson's like, go ahead, I'll shoot the first one of you that leaves. And so they all cowered down and didn't go. And David Crockett was not really there at that particular place. And that's another one of those examples of stories that, back then, everybody lied. So the politicians lied, the reporters lied. Nobody was telling the truth. And so it's very difficult to know what really happened, but other people who are way smarter than me have really done a lot of research and determined that he was not really physically there when that happened, but he heard about it.
But he didn't like the way Jackson was treating Indians
Absolutely.
at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. He was never... He claimed that he was a supporter of Andrew Jackson, but based on the articles that I read and things, he was always pushing back against the things that Andrew Jackson wanted to do. I mean, and David Crockett was very much not afraid to write or have someone write on his behalf ideas that would have been considered, very liberal for the day and the time. So, he very much was progressive in the way that he was thinking for somebody who really, had very little education. Yes?
I think it goes without saying that if he had survived in the post-war era, he would have played a big part in the government of the Republic of Texas. What do you think the chances are that he would have ended up as president of the Republic of Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I think very much he could have, because by the time he died, his brand was huge. The play that people think was about him was everywhere. It was the most seen play in its day of any other play, and so more people knew I think he was the biggest celebrity at the time. Now, whenever I say that, people say, "What about Benjamin Franklin?" Or people are throwing out names. If I say he was the first big celebrity, but to me, he was the first big celebrity who had a lot of the trappings that celebrities today have. And so, yeah, I mean, you never know. You just don't know what could have happened. But certainly, he could have. He was, at the time, bigger than Sam Houston. So who knows what could have happened if he hadn't have died. If he died. No, he died. Yes?
But you mentioned celebrity, and it does sound like he was mostly famous at some point for being famous.
Yeah.
He hadn't really done anything.
Yeah, he one thing that he was, his biggest passion was for squatters. So, during that time in West Tennessee, a lot of people moved in. built a cabin, cleared the land, and said, surely when the time comes, they'll let me, stay here. Well, but then they didn't realize the gold mine they were sitting on, and so then the surveyors came in and said, you don't own this land, you got to go. So he was wanting to, first he was wanting for the squatters to be able to keep the land that they were farming, and then he wanted them to be able to get it at an affordable price. And he was trying to get bills passed that would do that. And he never could get it passed, but that was his biggest passion, was trying to do that. So he did want to do that, but I think he did enjoy the trappings of fame. He enjoyed having people screaming his name out when he would go, speak. And he enjoyed seeing his book in a bookstore, and So yeah, I do think he enjoyed that.
Good at storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Telling tales.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Well, how old was he when he died?
He was almost 50. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
You mentioned that you are associated with the Alamo,
Mhm.
and you cited a quote from Forget the Alamo. Can you tell me what kind of reception that quote has received?
Yeah, I mean, just as a person who was doing a David Crockett book around the same time that they did their book, they were supposed to go speak at a conference or at the museum there, and then some politicians, pushed back because they were pushing down, the fame of the beloved people, and so those guys were disinvited. The writers were disinvited, and like the next week, their book was on the New York Times bestseller list. So I was like, I wish I would be disinvited from somewhere, So yes, there was a lot of controversy during that time about, the role of a museum is to have people come and talk, and that a politician shouldn't be able to bully writers away from a museum. So anyway, it was a lot of controversy, and people want their heroes, and I read the book. And I felt like they were saying this could have happened, this could have happened. I mean, I didn't feel like they were saying anything that didn't seem logical and journalistically sound. But now that I've said that, maybe I'm going to get canceled since we're on Zoom, So go buy the book. Yes.
Scott, we have a question on Zoom. They asked, Patricia Robinson asked, did Crockett have anything to do with the scandals created and spread about Jackson's wife, Rachel?
Not that I could ever find. I mean, but there were so many, I'm sure in his own little private circle, but I didn't find anything privately written or publicly written, or him that I could find, So no, not that I could find. Not that it's not there, but I never saw anything. Yes?
You showed at the beginning of the chronology of Crockett and Congress, 2 terms, off returning and back.
Yes. And then when he was off, he and his wife, I don't want to be too public about the private lives of David Crockett and his second wife, but they lived in different cabins and different. She farmed a whole different set of land, and he lived off by himself and was depressed and was a writer actually claimed to have found him and interviewed him for the paper, and it was a very sad picture that he painted, and then he ran again and won, and so, it's very clear that he was not going to be happy unless he was in the public eye once he had tasted what the public fame was all about. There's another story, and again, it is difficult to know when the stories are true and when the stories are stories. And so when I could prove it, I would say, it was proven. But, there's another story of some people in D.C., and he was in a bar, and somebody came up and said, hey, Crockett, there's some people here who want to see you. They've come all the way from so-and-so. And so they came in, and the people noted that he thickened up his accent, and he, and then when they left, he said something along the lines of they came to see a show and now they've seen it, or something like that. So, he was very, very well aware, that he was creating an image.
Along those lines, did you, and it may have never come up, but the story of him building his image and the painting, and very similar to Teddy Roosevelt, being upper crust New York elite,
Yeah,
Was he a student of Crockett, or?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. What I tried to do, because I was, I was trying to make my book be different than all the other books. When I was researching this book, somebody wrote, "The last thing the world needs is another David Crockett book." So I tried to make mine different. So I put inside here pictures of different people, and Roosevelt was one of them. People dressed up like David Crockett. So each chapter starts off with a picture of someone dressed up like David Crockett, and it was so much fun trying to find these. And I tried to find obscure ones. I didn't want to find, ones that everybody else uses of celebrities. So, like, I have David Crockett from the Monkees. When a version of him was acted on the Monkees. Anyway, so he is one of those. And I would reach out to people and say, "Hey, can I use your image in my book?" And so this was the one I was looking for. I was thinking I had everything, but I didn't have really any Broadway, and so I was wondering if there was Broadway. So I found Bart Chateau, who is a Broadway star, and he has this is what he looks like. He's on page. He's about in the middle of the book. He's on page 130. So he looks like that. But anyway, so I contacted him and told him, that I was what I was doing. I wanted his picture, and he gave it to me. And then he said, "What I'd like to do, can I come there and do my David Crockett show?" So we had him come to Discovery Park of America, and he put on his whole David Crockett show. So it was really fun. Everybody was super enthusiastic about it. The producer of Airplane, his name escapes me, but he is a huge Davy Crockett memorabilia collector, and he was really into the book, and he let me put his picture in here. And so anyway, it was really fun to find people today that are really into Davy Crockett. And every once in a while, somebody will come to Discovery Park and want to see me, and they'll be a big fan of Davy Crockett, which I think Davy Crockett would have loved.
How big do you think the Davy Crockett phenomenon has been if Disney had never done that?
I don't think it would have been. Yeah, I don't think he would. I think it would be. I don't know how big you think Sam Houston is, but he like that maybe. Or I'm trying to think of some James K. Polk.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Disney made it really sexy, and the what's interesting too is Disney shot the whole. They shot all their Davy Crockett stuff. They shot in color, and it was supposed to just be 4 episodes, and those they just aired in black and white. And so all of a sudden, it was 4 episodes, and Davy Crockett dies in the end. So they were like, "What do we do now?" So they cobbled them back together again and put them in color and released them as a major motion picture. So, they just stretched it out every way they could. And there were over, I can't remember the number, 550 licensed products that had Davy Crockett on them right after that movie came out. So they were hustling to get all that stuff out to the public. Anything else? Well, I'll be back there. If anybody wants me to sign your book, I'll be happy to. I sell them for $20 or a coonskin, as it says back there, or an IOU. So just it's really fun getting to talk to you guys about a topic that I really love, and I hope to see you at Discovery Park of America on the other side of the state. Thank you.